To see you again this morning. It's an incredible thing how 7 days can go through and we all come back together here on Sunday mornings and pretty much see the same faces. Some are gone that are absent because of travels and whatever, and yet it's this group that we keep seeing. It's family, and we gather together and we take a meal together. The Lord's Supper. And all of these things gives us a frame of reference about what we do and what we believe not only has value, but gives us strength on what we're up to. Reminds us of who we are. And I'm glad you're here, because when I see you, I'm reminded of why I stand here. Not at this position, but stand here in life. And what is important to me is belonging to Jesus Christ and being a part of this family. Very much is. It's what keeps me going. Got a question for you this morning. It's there on the screen in front of you. How do you see Jesus? Now, I know we've not really ever seen a picture of him. And there's all kinds of artist renditions about Jesus. And likely in life you've seen maybe a movie about him, and you have maybe in your memory some caption about him. But I want to get an idea in your mind about how we see Jesus, because it bears a whole lot on who we are as Christians and what we do, the response that we give to him. And so as we're looking at this, I want us to see that. Now, generally speaking, how we see people determines your trust and response to them. So just see that for a minute. If you are walking into some unusual setting and you saw someone that was kind of gruff, and you'd be a little bit standoffish, because that you're looking at them and you're not quite sure how to take them. And how we see people in our lives around us, wherever, passing on the sidewalk, or if you're pulled over by a policeman and he comes walking up to the window and he's smiling at you, you're feeling a little better, right? Maybe you know you've done something wrong, but it's that perception of how you see a person really determines your trust and your response to them. Now I want you to think about this, because there's individuals, for instance, we go to somebody and we sit down at a desk with them and we're wanting to discuss finances, and we go to a financial advisor and we see some person that's young looking and smiling and happy, and they've got lots of paperwork out there and graphs behind them and all kinds of things, and you think, this is going to work okay, you know, and I'm visualizing this is going to give me a good outcome. Until you find out maybe who they used to work with some times ago. Because maybe their financial advisor was also a person that happened to work with an individual back some time ago that died not long ago. His name was Bernie Madoff. And all of a sudden you see this on a picture over here and you back up, because you're now perceiving that person a little different. You see, how you perceive, how you look at that person determines how you'll trust them, which determines how you respond to them. There was a preacher back some years ago. In 1960, he started work in Indiana. He was just a really exuberant guy, real outgoing, and he did such an effective work that he moved to California, there in, I believe it was the San Diego or San Francisco area. Did an amazing job and had a good-sized congregation, and people loved him. They followed him. They just looked to him as the greatest thing ever. And it was having such an impact on people and how they followed him that he picked up his crowd and he moved them to another country, Guyana. And there he was there for a while and really preaching tremendous work and going on for quite a while. But he caught the eye of government officials because of his connection with the governments, even in California. And so they followed down there a representative from the United States along with some people. They did a little investigation, and as they were returning back to the airplane to get on their plane, they were shot down by individuals that belonged to that faith group. And later, when some people came in to investigate what was going on, He gave them all some Kool-Aid to drink. Maybe you've ever heard about, don't be drinking the Kool-Aid. This is cyanide-laced poison. And 916 people gave their lives that day. 304 of them were children because of how they saw that person. They felt like he had the answers to everything. And they were so wrong. But it determined how their response was. Now, as I build this concept in your mind about how you look at people and it determines your trust and your response to them, I come back to that question then, how do you see Jesus? And I want to look at two passages this morning. First one is from John chapter 9. To me, it's one of the most interesting. I guess it's hard to determine. Today it's the most interesting because that's what I'm talking about. One of the most interesting passages about Jesus. And it's about a guy that was born blind and the interaction that Jesus and others had with this individual. Now, as you jump in verse 13, Jesus has already healed the man. And there's a little bit of a question about coming out of this. And so we'll pick up in verse 13. It says, they, and I'm wondering, who is this they? The guy was healed because of what Jesus said to do. He went and he washed in the pool of Siloam, as Jesus told him to do. And he goes away seeing. Now, he hadn't seen Jesus before, but he followed his command. And obviously, he hasn't seen him, but he was seeing him in a sense of visualizing him, enough to trust him a bit. And now he's convinced there's something special about him. But before that can even actually sit and sink into his mind, these they, whoever they are, some religious people, felt like there was something to be examined here. And they brought him, who formerly was blind, to the Pharisees, the religious leaders. It's like the judicial court now, it seems to be. Because, verse 14, now it was the Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened the man's eyes. Jesus' instructions. Verse 15, then the Pharisees also asked him again on how he'd received his sight. And he said to them, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. How do you see Jesus? Well, verse 16, therefore some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God. Oh, really? Because he does not keep the Sabbath. Oh, okay. But others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such a thing? So there was a division among them on how to look at Jesus. Some people felt like he did this miracle. There must be something fantastic. But there are other people that already had, watch this, they had already set in their mind what Jesus couldn't be. And so they had reason to pick it. He healed somebody on the Sabbath. But they've been examining Jesus for so long that they already had determined he can't be anything special, especially a prophet from God. And that's all they were looking at that moment. He's much more, you know that. But can he really be a prophet? And so they're trying to figure this out. And so the people are a little bit divided about it. And so verse 17, they said to the blind man, now they brought him in, of course, again, what do you say about him? Because he opened your eyes, and he said he's a prophet, because that's how he sees him. So he's going to have a trust in him, and his response, as you'll see later on, is going to be different than those who don't have the trust because they're looking at Jesus differently. Now follow me, because I'm talking to Christians, I realize that. Our young people that are being brought up in the church, that have studied God's Word, that understand how they should look at Jesus or not look at Jesus. But I'm going to question how you look, all of you older generations, how you really look at Jesus. And make sure we look at him clearly. So there's a question on how to see Jesus. He's a prophet at the end of verse 17. But, verse 18, the Jews did not believe concerning him that he'd been born blind and received his sight until they called the parents of him who had received his sight. So they're going to settle the matter because really they didn't want to see Jesus. So they brought the parents in. Now we're going to see how things go. And we're going to put this to the real test. We're going to scientifically examine, is this guy really the one that was born blind, or it just kind of looks like him and people are trying to pass him off as that person? Verse 19, and they asked them, saying, is this your son who you say was born blind? How is it does he now see? They were looking for, nope, that's not him. But that wasn't the response they got from the parents. His parents answered and said to them, we know that this is our son, and that he was born blind. So up until this moment, we know everything about him. But when you get to the next part, but for what means he now sees, we do not know. Now you're asking for a judgment. We're not talking about a judgment here. Is this the guy, or is he not the one that's your son? But they're afraid to say anything more, but they're expected to say something more. And so they're helping the Pharisees out because they're scared of the Pharisees, who are worried about how they see Jesus. So they say that he's of age, the parents say, ask him, and he'll speak for himself. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews. For the Jews had agreed already. Get that? They already know how they're going to see him. I sit down with my 5-year-old grandson. We're having a meal, and there's something on his plate he's not seen before. He says, I don't want it. It's good, taste it. I don't like it. I've already decided it's not good. It's green. I want something that's got bread in it or meaty or something. You know how we are? You're not like that. No, not at all. Yeah, we are. We already decide things. We already have drawn a conclusion. We're skeptical of financial people because we already know that people have taken advantage. We're skeptical of religious people because we know what kind of wackos are out there in the world that get up on Sunday morning before anybody else does and read a Bible and then come down here and tell people about it as if that's going to make a difference. So we're skeptical, and how we look at those people is going to be a bit with I'm not too sure. Give me a magnifying glass and I'll find some problems. And it bears to how we look at Jesus. Well, this is how these people are examining Jesus. And this is the basic part of this message here, what's going on. People feared these Jewish people because they'd already determined, what did they already determine? That if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, the anointed one, that he'd be put out of the synagogue. And we don't want that. So we're not going to look at Jesus that way. We're not going to answer that way, although it's kind of unusual for the first time in our entire life of 40 years that this son has been born. We're actually looking him in the eyes. And the first thing we have to say is, go ask him. Boy, there's a loving set of parents, right? Because they're not quite sure about this Jesus, although they've got a son now that's healed. But they've already helped to determine with the Pharisees, they're not going to go along with it. Therefore, his parents said, verse 23, ask him, he's of age. So, this is amusing. I have to chuckle every time I read this. They again called the man who was blind and said to him, give God the glory. Well, they had been. Give God the glory. We know that this man's a sinner. How do you look at Jesus? The question is asked again. How do you know he's a sinner? How do you know he's ever committed a sin? Can you name a sin? Have you ever seen him steal? Have you ever seen him look at a woman the wrong way? Have you ever seen him lie? Have you ever seen him curse? Have you ever seen him whatever? No. But we know he's a sinner because how they have already determined how they're going to look at Jesus and determine their trust or lack of it, and the response that they're making because of that. So they asked the man with a statement affirming, you better believe like us, because we know this man is a sinner. Verse 25, this is my chuckle point. And he answered and said, whether he's a sinner or not, I do not know. Because we don't know. But one thing I know, I was blind and now I see. Do you want to know how I see Jesus? If he was standing here, I'd see him clearly. Better than you see him, because now I know what he does. And you totally are denying it and are blind to the fact of what he's done. You're not even looking at Jesus. Of course, that's them, that's not us. You know, we know better because we're here on Sunday mornings, right? Right. Then they said to him again, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? This is chuckle number 2. And he answered, I told you already. And you didn't listen. This is a blind guy that used to sit outside of the temple begging for money. Now he is rebuking the Pharisees, the religious leaders, for not listening. And then he gives them a little jab. Do you want to become one of his disciples? He knows better. But if they really looked at Jesus the right way, they'd be asking. Again, the question, how do you see Jesus? They reviled him for that. They didn't like it at all. And they said, you are his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spoke to Moses. And as for this fellow, we don't know where he's from. Well, they do know where he's from, but they're worried about it. The man answered and said to them, why, now this is a marvelous thing, that you don't know where he's from, and yet he's opened my eyes. Duh, as the kids would say. How are you looking at Jesus, guys? We can go through this whole thing here, and we know what's going on in the process. But as it comes all the way down the line here, and you come to the latter part here, and you're examining the man that's born blind, and you're seeing what's going on, and we're seeing how this whole thing really develops. He opened their eyes. And the point is, lesson number 1 is that he can open eyes. How do you see Jesus? He can open eyes. Lesson number 2, he came to change your life. And he did this, man. This is part of what's going on out of this package here that we're looking at about this man. This is what Jesus does. How do you look at him? He can open your eyes to the world. He can allow you to see things you've never seen before if you'll look at Jesus first and you have his viewpoint. And you look at the things that Satan offers you and you say, I'm not even interested in that. He's opened my eyes. Now I can see. He has changed my life. I can stand and argue with the best of the religious leaders because I was blind, but now I see. So I want you to see that. Now the Pharisees didn't get that. And so at the very end of the passage, when Jesus begins to talk to the guy after he makes an appearance to him, there's a discussion about how the Pharisees are really in fact blind because they won't look at Jesus. Still the question for us, for me as a preacher, and for you, for whatever you are and whatever you do as Christians, all of us together, how do you see Jesus? Because he can open your eyes and what's going on in life. And he can change your life. Next passage, Mark chapter 12. Real quickly here, look at what's going on in this situation. As we've already determined, some of the religious leaders don't like Jesus. They don't see him for who he is. They don't trust him. They will not respond to him. Pharisees was one group. Herodians was another group. You don't hear too much about them in the New Testament. But they were a group of religious leaders kind of on par with the Pharisees, but they had a strong political leaning toward the great Herod, thus Herodians. And they had a real good political connection because, boy, it made pockets jingle with cash. And so they liked it. Now, the Pharisees didn't win out too often, and sometimes they would team up with other people that they would not normally associate because they hated Jesus more than they hated the others. So verse 13, then they sent to him some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to catch him at his words. And when they'd come, they said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true. You could imagine they're kind of coughing below their breath. And you care about no one. Now that's what they really felt about him. At least they'd like to emphasize that as best they could because they're trying to discredit Jesus. Totally not true, but that's their claim. And you care about no one, for you do not regard the person of men, but teach the way of God in truth. That he did do. So here's the question, Jesus. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or to not? You've read this before, but let's read through it again. Shall we pay or shall we not pay? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, Why do you test me? Bring to me a denarius that I may see it. So they brought it, and he said to them, Whose image and inscription is on this? They said to him, Caesar's. And then Jesus answered and said to them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God. And Mark says, and they marveled at him. Really, they were disappointed. They were hurt. They were upset. They were bothered that they couldn't win on the situation. They really didn't see Jesus as a prophet, and they certainly didn't see him as the Son of God. How do they see Jesus? Well, they were going to try to debate that and try to discredit him. And so out of this, we'll look at this lesson, and we see a couple things here. Number one, Jesus always outsmarts the religious leaders. And that's usually our takeaway. He's the smartest one of the bunch. And it's true. You can't trick Jesus. As you're coming up and asking a question of Jesus, to trick him, he already knows what you're going to say before you even ask. And he has probably a dozen different answers that are true that just blow you away. You can't outsmart Jesus. And then out of that, too, you might reluctantly have to agree, we've got to pay our taxes. But what we oftentimes overlook is we ought to be giving to God the things that are God's. You see, we miss that picture because we're so good about ridiculing the Pharisees and how Jesus outsmarts them and he's better than they are, that we totally miss the point that Jesus is making to the Pharisees, to the Herodians, and to us. How do you see Jesus? If you see him as you truly should, you'd be giving to God the things that belong to him. Let's take a test here. Anybody got any money in their wallet, purse? Pull one out. Alex, I meant to give you this. Where are you, Alex? Because Alex does not carry cash with him. Learned that a long time ago. He says that he's too easy a hit. If somebody comes along and says, you got any money? He says, yeah, here, take it. So he just quit carrying cash. So all he says is, I just don't have any money, sorry. Whose picture is that? I think Abraham Lincoln. That's a $5 bill. Good job. What does it say on the back side right there?
In God we trust.
In God we trust. In God we trust. Do you know that that little inscription is on every bill that's printed in the United States? Doesn't matter if you have a 5, a 20, 100, or a penny. Every one of them says, in God we trust. So what do you do with things that belong to God? Depends if I trust Jesus or not. Because if I'm really looking at Jesus for what he is, I know that he can change my life. I know that he can open my eyes. And I know that he'll always provide. I know that he'll take care of me. So this says, in God we trust. So that's where it belongs. Could have been a 20. I just happened to pull the 5 out first. But every bit of it, on how you see Jesus, he's the one who created me. He's the one that sustains me. And my trust really shouldn't be in that money. Although it has that little tiny inscription that says, in God we trust, we really want to stick it back in our pocket, do you not? You've already pulled it out. Go and drop it in the collection on the way out the door if you trust in God. That's my point. You see, what we're missing a lot of times in that little passage is we ought to be giving to God what is God's. How do you see Jesus will determine your giving. Does he provide or not? Will he take care of you? Can he change your life? Can dropping more money in that collection give you more blessings? Jesus says it can. How you see Jesus will determine your response to him. Ouch. Now I'm stepping on toes. My shoes are scuffed, including yours. Because the question really is, are we giving to God like we ought to be giving? Well, it all depends on how we're seeing Jesus. It'll determine how much we trust him, and it'll determine our response. And maybe your response should be a little heavier on the drop some more in. As a minister and a missionary in the past, I have seen people give phenomenal amounts of what they don't have in order to get God's work done. They saw Jesus in a clearer fashion than I ever could have. Their trust and their response was so outpouring that I was trying to beg them to take it back. This is too much. Oh, no, it's not. I've been blessed. And that's how they see Jesus. And so the lesson for us this morning is, how do you see Jesus? I was blind, and now I see. He changes my life. And I trust him enough to dump it all in there. Because he keeps putting it back and doubling it. I don't know how he does this. But I know he does. And that's how I see Jesus. Are you following like you should? Are you giving like you should? Do you need to change? It's a good question. If you need to respond this morning, there's space down front. How do you see Jesus? Do you need to come to him? Then do so while we stand and sing. Happy to Jesus for the cleansing